I never thought I would be the kind of mother who would systematically dismantle her own daughter's future over a single phone call. But when the person you've sacrificed everything for looks you in the eye and tells you that you're essentially a bank account and not a human being, something inside you just snaps. Imagine spending 20 years building a life for your child, working double shifts, and skipping your own meals just so she could have the best of everything, only for her to tell you that you aren't aesthetic enough to spend Christmas with her new high society friends. Was I wrong for what I did next, or was it a long overdue lesson in reality? I want you to listen to the whole story and tell me honestly if I crossed the line, or if I finally stood up for myself after years of being a doormat, because I honestly don't know if I can ever look at my daughter the same way again. It all started back when Claire was born, and her father decided that being a parent was too much of a vibe killer, and disappeared into the sunset, leaving me with a mountain of medical bills and a tiny baby who was my entire world. I worked as a waitress, then an office assistant, and eventually clawed my way up into a decent corporate position, but every single cent I earned was funneled into Claire. She had the private violin lessons, the designer prom dresses, and the elite university tuition that I'm still paying off. I didn't mind at the time because I thought we were a team, a duo against the world. I remember nights where I would sit at the kitchen table, dizzy with exhaustion, calculating how many more hours of overtime I needed just to make sure she could have that specific brand of sneakers everyone else was wearing. I never wanted her to feel the sting of poverty that I grew up with. I wanted her to walk into any room with her head held high, knowing she belonged. But as Claire got older, especially after she moved to the city and started dating a guy named Julian from an incredibly wealthy family, the girl I knew started to fade away. She began criticizing my clothes, my house, and even the way I spoke, saying I was too working class, and that it was embarrassing for her. She would come home for a weekend and spend the entire time looking at her phone, sighing at my outdated furniture, or making snide comments about the cheap wine I bought to celebrate her arrival. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a servant who was only tolerated because I signed the checks. This year, I wanted to do something truly spectacular for her, something that would prove I could still provide the luxury she craved. I had been saving for 5 years for a bucket list trip, a $17,000 luxury tour through the Swiss Alps, including first-class flights, 5-star chalets, and a private Christmas Eve dinner. I worked weekends, skipped vacations, and drove an old car with a rattling engine just to save up those thousands. I thought this would be the moment we finally reconnected, and I could show her how much she meant to me. I had the tickets booked, the itinerary printed, and I was going to surprise her when she came home for the holidays. I had even bought her a beautiful cashmere coat to wear on the flights, imagining us sipping hot cocoa while looking at the snow-capped mountains. But 2 weeks before Christmas, Claire called me, and the tone of her voice was different, cold, clinical, and dismissive. She didn't ask how I was. She just told me that Julian's parents had invited her to their estate in the Hamptons for a real Christmas gala, and that she wouldn't be coming home. She said, "Mom, you have to understand, these people are important for my future, and honestly, your little house is just so depressing during the holidays, and I don't want Julian to see how we used to live." I was stunned. The silence on the line was heavy. I told her about the trip, thinking surely that would change her mind, but she laughed. She actually laughed and said, "Mom, a trip with just you sounds exhausting. Why don't you just give me the cash value of the trip instead? That way I can buy a dress that actually fits in at the gala, and you can just stay home and relax." The disrespect was like a physical blow to the chest. She wasn't just choosing a party over me. She was asking me to fund her abandonment of me. She went on to explain how Julian's mother was a prominent socialite and how bad it would look if Claire turned up in something I had picked out. She essentially told me that my presence was a liability to her social climbing. I sat in my quiet living room after she hung up, looking at the Christmas tree I had decorated with her favorite childhood ornaments. And I realized that I had raised a stranger who viewed my love as a commodity. I looked at the little clay ornament she made in 2nd grade that said, "Best Mom Ever," and I realized that person, the little girl who loved me, was dead. She had been replaced by a hollow shell of a person who valued status over blood. I spent that night crying until my eyes were swollen shut, but by the morning, the tears had turned into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was awake. I called the travel agency and the airline. Because I had purchased the premium insurance, I was able to cancel almost everything. I got back nearly every penny of that $17,000. But I didn't stop there. I went through my bank statements with a fine-tooth comb. Claire's phone, her car insurance, her high-end gym membership, her Spotify, her Netflix, even her Amazon Prime account. They were all still in my name, paid for by my credit card every month. I had been paying for her lifestyle, while she treated me like trash. I sat down at my computer, and one by one, I hit the cancel button on all of it. I even called the landlord of her luxury apartment in the city. You see, I was the co-signer and I was paying the bulk of the rent while she found herself in her entry-level marketing job. I told the landlord that I was withdrawing my co-signature and would not be paying the next month's rent. I felt a strange sense of peace as I watched the subscription canceled messages pop up. It wasn't about being petty, it was about being done. It was the realization that if I was too depressing to be around, then my money should be too depressing to use. I was reclaiming my life and my dignity. So that is the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice between continuing to enable her or teaching her what life looks like without my support. Before I tell you what happened when she found out and the absolute chaos that followed, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have sucked it up for the sake of family, or would you have pulled the plug like I did? Let me know, because things got much, much worse. About 3 days later, the storm hit. My phone started blowing up with dozens of missed calls and increasingly frantic texts from Claire. Apparently, she had been out at a high-end restaurant with Julian and his friends when her card, the one I paid for, was declined. Then, when she tried to call me to complain, she realized her phone service had been cut off. She had to use Julian's phone to finally get through to me, and she was hysterical. She was screaming that I had embarrassed her in front of the most important people in her life, and that I was financially abusing her. She actually used those words. She said I was a monster for leaving her stranded in a restaurant where she couldn't even pay for her own salad. I stayed completely calm, which I think made her even angrier. I told her, "Claire, you said my house was depressing and that a trip with me would be exhausting. I figured I would save you the exhaustion by removing myself and my money from your life entirely. Since you're moving into high society now, I'm sure Julian's family will be happy to cover your expenses." She went quiet for a second before letting out a sob, saying she couldn't believe her own mother would do this to her right before Christmas. She told me I was ruining her life, and that she was now stuck in the city with no way to pay for her luxury apartment's utilities or her commute. She even had the audacity to ask for the $17,000 one last time, saying she needed it to survive now. I simply told her that she was an adult, and that aesthetic people surely have a way of handling their own bills. I reminded her that she had spent the last 2 years telling me how much smarter and more refined she was than me, so surely she could figure out how to pay a phone bill. The fallout was massive, and it didn't just stay between us. My former mother-in-law, who hadn't spoken to me in a decade, called me to tell me I was being heartless and that Claire was distraught. I told her she was welcome to send Claire the $17,000 herself, if she felt so strongly about it, considering she hadn't contributed a cent to Claire's upbringing. She hung up on me. Then came the text from Julian. He tried to mediate by telling me that Claire was a delicate soul, and that I was causing her unnecessary stress during a very important social season. I replied to him with a screenshot of the rent invoice for Claire's apartment, and asked him if he'd like to take over the payments since he was so concerned about her well-being. He never replied. It turns out Julian's family didn't actually know Claire was being funded by her depressing mother. She had told them she came from old money. When the check stopped and the apartment was on the line, her lies started to unravel. On Christmas morning, instead of being in a Swiss chalet or a Hamptons gala, I sat on my couch with a cup of expensive coffee, a book I'd wanted to read for years, and the knowledge that my bank account was $17,000 heavier, and my life was finally free of the constant anxiety of trying to please someone who didn't respect me. I watched the snow fall outside my window and felt a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. Claire ended up having to move out of her apartment in a panic and into a small studio in a much less aesthetic part of town because Julian's parents, predictably, had no interest in paying for a charity case once they realized her wealthy background was a lie she'd been telling. Julian broke up with her shortly after, claiming he couldn't be with someone who wasn't transparent about their finances. It's funny how fast that high society love fades when the money runs out. Claire is currently working 2 jobs, one at a coffee shop and one as a junior clerk, and she hasn't spoken to me in months, other than to send a bill for her car repairs which I promptly deleted. I heard through a mutual friend that she's telling everyone I'm a toxic parent, but for the first time in 20 years, I don't feel guilty. I've realized that being a mother doesn't mean being a victim. I learned that you cannot buy someone's love, and you certainly shouldn't let them use your kindness as a weapon against you. If you don't respect the person providing the life you enjoy, you don't deserve that life. I spent the $17,000 on myself. I remodeled my kitchen, bought a reliable car, and put the rest into my retirement fund. I'm finally living for me. I hope Claire eventually learns that character is more important than a gala invitation, but that's a lesson she has to learn on her own dime. Like this video if you were on my side and think Claire needed this reality check. Subscribe for more stories like this where we dive into the drama and the truth behind family secrets. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far by canceling everything, or was it the right move? I'll see you all in the next story.